Now, first of all, I would like to start with my personal thanks. I'd like to thank the committee, which is really at the basis of the Emotions Forum, in particular Viviana, Kassam, and Clara, who guided me, who really was so helpful for me, and it was a joy for me so far. Having said that, I think I should disclose something that is my own affiliation. I work for Biogen, a biotechnology company. As Clara said, I'm also co-founder of Women's Brain Project and current CEO. I'm here to tell you the work of our organization, not necessarily what I will tell you represent the position of the other organizations I'm affiliated with. This is just a disclaimer, so to speak. Having said that, I would like to thank Viviana even further and once more, because this is my personal thanks, and also on behalf of all neuroscientists who work so intensely and relentlessly to understand the functioning of this beautiful organ, which is the brain. This forum is visionary in this sense, is unique and pioneering in its nature and organization. So thank you all on behalf of all the people like me who deal with neurosciences. Having said that, I'd like to tell you how sex and gender are biological variables which have to be considered with regard to clinical development of therapeutical solutions. However, before telling you all these things, I am here to make another premise. What do we mean when we say the word sex in medicine, and what is the meaning of gender? Sex is our genetic heritage, the thing which is encrypted in our DNA. When we talk about gender, we mean the construct which society builds around an individual to make him or her a woman, a man, or all the other nuances that can be present between these two extremes. Now, having said that, why then sex and gender is particularly important for brain diseases and mental illnesses? Well, it's a matter of numbers. As Pamela said, it's a matter of prevalence and incidence rate of the disease, which means there'll be diseases more predominant among women and other diseases which will be more predominant among men with regard to brain and the mind. Well, let's make a few examples. First of all, Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer is essentially a feminine. 70% of Alzheimer patients are women. Same thing for depression. 80% of patients, anxiety, 80% of patients are women. Migraine is a woman's disease. Meningioma is a tumor which is prevailing among women. The anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis, well, is ADHD. It's new because it was described and classified as such in 2007. So we are talking about, not long ago. It's a disease which prevalent among women, almost exclusively among women. And, well, previously it was recognized as a woman possessed by the devil, hysterical women. These very young women were really put into a hospital where they should die, or where they died. If they survived, they would have had sequelae that were so negative and fatal. What do we know about this disease? We discovered that paradoxically benign tumors in some cases, and luckily very rare cases, produce antibodies which will hit the brain and will really surround it. There'll be a psychotic symptom, even coma and death. People used to talk about a woman possessed by the devil in these cases. Why? Because during autopsy, the teratoma, this benign tumor, was analyzed, and within such a tumor, which starts from embryon tissues, would found teeth, eyes, hair. What was that? The brainchild of a sexual intercourse with the devil. So not long ago, alas, in some regions of our world, it's still the case. I myself was able to handle such clinical cases where it took us months working with neurologists, psychiatrists, specialists in internal medicine to understand it was an encephalitis. It was an ADHD. That's the problem. Let's talk about male. Well, even among male, there are diseases which are predominant vis-à-vis women, like Parkinson's disease or lateral sclerosis. This is, again, a matter of numbers. However, is this a number only, or should we consider other aspects? Well, let's start from risk factors. Based on sex and gender, there'll be an individual will be prone to a disease or another. And why this? Because we are exposed by our occupation to certain environments. Let's think of those who work with asbestos. Well, mostly they were men and they had mesothelioma, or caregivers. Most caregivers are women, and they do have a role in societies as caregivers. So those who care. If you are a caregiver, you are at risk of developing depression and senile dementia. These are very important facts to consider. And this reflects also on the presence of biomarkers in our brain. What we know, for instance, in Alzheimer's disease, is that for the same level of amyloid protein, the protein which accumulates 20 years before the first symptom, for the same level of amyloid, women will have more deposits of tau protein, the one which is downstream this amyloid, which is a neurotoxic protein, which determines the neurodegeneration. Let's talk about the symptom. We know that in Parkinson, well, men will suffer more than women of this motor blockades, will have an awareness more compromised, or cognitive performance compromised. And this is a risk to their functions, motor functions, and also in terms of how the brain works and the speed at which it works. Therapeutic answer. I have another factor. Zolpidem, to sleep well at night, it is should be given with care to women at lower doses, because women then will encounter side effects according to which they will feel confused, dizzy, it's as if they had drunk too much, the hangover. Sbornia, says the speaker, and says, I'm sorry, it's the first Italian speech that I give. It's the first time that I speak in my mother tongue. The so-called sbornia, hangover, being drunk. Do you know how we were able to see that effect, which is mostly present in women? Because they had car accidents. They ended to ER, and that's why. We wonder why. Because they took too much zolpidem. Should we reach that point? This is my question. Obviously, this has a value, and it also affects the treatment. Women are better than men in terms of following a therapy, and also new technology. Certainly women are more neuro and new technology friendly when we speak of digital innovation to introduce into treatments. Recapping, gender-sex differences, well, it isn't so much who is the best one and park the car. It's very important in terms of diseases as well. We talk about diagnosis and prevention, and also treatment, and what it means to develop a clinical trial. Well, the colleague so brilliantly said the reasons at the basis of these differences, so many. We heard about genetics, our genes, the evolution of the species, the microbiome. Well, we can think of the very formation of gonads, or, the effect which hormones may have at the level of the brain. Another thing that, in my opinion, may have a remarkable value is the sleep. We know women may have more problems vis-à-vis men in their ability to have a good night's sleep. Why? Because women have the pregnancy, childbirth, milk. I mean, I learned with my own boys when they were very young. I started and sleep well when they were 4-year-old. Same thing happens during premenopausal periods and postmenopause. Here again, sleep troubles occur. Why? Because studies show that these neurotoxic proteins, key for the development of neurodegenerative diseases, these proteins are removed during sleep, and probably this hormonal effect has got its own reason. The advice is to educate people to sleep well. Having said this, why is this important? Why? Why is this essential in psychiatry and neurology? Why? Because in psychiatry and neurology, very often a symptom is the same, despite the underlying disease differs. What does it mean? It means that when I was working in the psychiatry ward and I had to see a patient, well, I saw this person depressed, and I was wondering, is this a proper depression or something else? Because very often, and I repeat, a symptom is common. However, the underlying disease is just another matter. A Parkinson's disease may appear as a depression initially. Same thing with Alzheimer's patients. Very often, the women who suffer from Alzheimer's disease, well, they are diagnosed later, of course, because women compensate with their own verbal reserve. They mask the cognitive lacunae or deficit. Very often women come to the doctor and feeling depressed. They are being treated for a couple of years with antidepressants, and then all of a sudden you discover that was the very start of a dementia. Now, it's very important. And what is even more complex in this scenario, it's this, something else is true. Very often, the same presence of biomarkers upon histopathology will show different symptoms. It happened to me so many times in my own ward when I thought a patient had a cortical basal degeneration with, of course, symptoms according to which the patient leaned like the Tower of Pisa, had problems in walking and had a very good memory. And then upon histopathology, that was a real Alzheimer. And you said, well, I didn't understand anything. Because we are talking about precision medicine, we shorten diagnostics. In psychiatry, it takes us years to reach an exact diagnosis. For instance, this is the time to diagnose that we need in order to reach a specific diagnosis. In highly developed countries, multiple sclerosis, 2 years, Parkinson, 1 year, Alzheimer, 2 years. I don't know what may happen in countries like Switzerland. We were really fond of this theme. We made it the very center of our activities at the center. We focused on Alzheimer, however we deal with so many other diseases. We were the first ones and say that we had to study this. We were pioneering in 2018 when we published our first case study. They said, "What are you doing? Are you joking?" We opened our Pandora box and we actually saw an explosion of scientific publications which study the differences in brain and mind diseases. We are really proud of this. We wrote a book. You see there, the title is Alzheimer's Disease and Sex and Gender, under Sex and Gender lens. We invited and talked to many worldwide and important experts, and we started a revolution also in terms of the big pharma, the pharmaceutical companies, those who would like to work with us because they want to learn. There's something else we recently saw. This is a JAMA publication. The number of women recruited in studies for Alzheimer's disease. We compared them, these numbers were analyzed looking at tested medicine or drugs or medicine being developed or under development. While in the past we had more women and we had a good percentage of women representing 70% I mentioned before who may get the Alzheimer's disease. We reached the 50%. You could say, well, 50%, we talk about a very slow and chronic multifactorial diseases and very complex diseases. If we don't have the right target group to analyze, representing the real population, well, possibly we lose some important information. There's another piece of information I'd like to offer to you. The 50 publications we analyze in order to reach the result, clinical studies, I mean, well, only 7 mentioned the results of the analysis based on sex and gender. Practically nobody talks about it. Nobody does anything. This is even more serious because this is a preclinical research with mice. There, sex and gender differences, that's a taboo, as if female and male mice were the same thing. Or possibly they say, well, female mouse, you know, this is difficult to study, and actually women do have their own menstrual cycle, and we have to analyze this. Women affected by Parkinson, there is a reversal, I mean, a different indication. More younger women show Parkinson's disease symptoms. What we learn with our patients, we put patients at the center, is that symptoms change according to the menstrual cycle, according to the periods. That's very important to handle a patient. Now I come to the conclusion, and this is the medicine of the future, digital medicine. I have 3 final slides. This is the first one. Currently, thanks to the discovery of the University of Zürich, we have reached the possibility to diagnose with a good safety margin the Alzheimer's disease based on a device which we have, our cell phone, an iPad. Thanks to augmented reality, by testing people in 15 minutes, we understand whether the brain will be a normal brain or with a deficit in terms of cognitive performance, or Alzheimer's disease brain. We verify how long it takes us to create circles on the screen of our cell phone. So I asked these people, it took me 5 years to convince the CEO, Tamaris, to look at this data, and asked, could you please look at your device? Could you please tell me whether your device recognizes whether my brain is blue or pink? And he said, no, I have more important things. And after 5 years, he calls me and says, look, we made it. We were able to look at this, the classifier, without knowing, of course, the sex of the person being tested, with a level of accuracy that's very high, 70% or more, was able to understand whether the brain of the person being tested was the brain of a female or a man, regardless of the age of the subject. Age wasn't a factor. Just to tell you, what do I mean? What we do not understand with our own eyes or with a neuropsychology test, something we do with the patients, would probably be understood by the future medicine, the digital medicine. So our call to action is the following. These differences should be analyzed, taken into account. We should also create ethical debates on the importance of all this, and eventually even understanding, when we develop the algorithms, the ones I showed you before, why a given algorithm makes a certain decisions. Make it explainable to the person observing the results, understanding whether this solution can be applied to everyone and all, or it'll be only useful for me or the person next to me. Well, and now let's go back to what Clara said and the other rapporteurs evoked. Precision medicine, in my opinion, will be fledged when we'll stop talking and stop talking about differences, and we'll be able to clarify the notion of characteristic, and when gender and sex will be just another characteristic to analyze within the ethnic group of the individual, weight, where this person lives. This will create big data. This will become precision medicine, and the institution we want to found will certainly be involved in this precision medicine. Swiss precision applied to medicine. Thank you so much.